Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dexter Thierrien, and I'm a lead analyst for technology and telecoms at Economist Intelligence, which is part of the Economist. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Data-Driven Legal Strategies, Leveraging Analytics for Success, which is the first of a series of 3 General Counsel Insight Hour series, which are aiming to look at navigating the intersection between law, technology, and business. And I would like to thank Thomson Reuters for sponsoring this event. Data is everywhere, and the legal profession is no exception. But how can that data be leveraged for success as part of a data-driven strategy? What is the best organizational structure? How can you optimize decision-making? And how can you use data to benchmark spending, especially for outside counsel? These are some of the questions and far more that we'll be looking to answer over the next hour. And I'm pleased to introduce 3 panelists who will join me today. With us, we have Rebecca Mills, with the Group General Counsel at EasyJet, John Doyle, with the Legal Chief Operating Officer at HSBC, and Jason Heyman, who is the Director and Legal Product Specialist at Thomson Reuters. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. So we're going to start with kind of an open question in terms of we're going to be discussing data in the legal segment, but maybe to set the scene, I'm going to ask you the same question to everyone, maybe starting with Rebecca, which is, do you think data is being used to its potential right now by the legal profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an easy, quick answer to that, which is no. I think we're just at the beginning of that journey, actually, Dexter, which is a super exciting place to be. For me, there's sort of 2 key issues here. So first of all, there's the access to data and sort of the tools, the opportunity, the investment that might be needed from the legal profession in order to have the data. But then secondly, there's the skill set that's required in the profession to understand, to use, to know what to do with it. And that's a really interesting opportunity, I think, for our sort of talent pipeline and in the immediate term as well, in terms of the sort of upskilling that the legal profession probably needs in this area. So yeah, I think that there's huge potential, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that more in this session. But I think we're really at the beginning of that journey.
John, do you feel the same?
Yeah, look, I think Rebecca makes some great points there that, I'd agree with. There's an enormous amount of data in in-house legal functions. It's how you then sort of access that data. Many people will have things saved in shared directories or an email, but how do you scrape that data so you can start to have insights into the data and then use that effectively in your kind of organization? I think that in-house kind of teams need to start to think about tools which would bring the data together to allow you to more easily access it and then undertake analysis, which will provide hopefully really powerful insights for general counsels, COOs, or heads of kind of areas in terms of what is the legal work that's being done by the in-house legal counsel, what's the work that's going outside, so you can manage your kind of business in the most effective and efficient way possible.
What about you, Jason? Are we going to go 3 for 3?
Yes, I'd be a fool to disagree with my other 2 panelists. I think that the answer is simply no. We don't use data effectively. We need to make sure that we can access the data, as John was saying. It's in so many different locations. We need to centralize it. Then we need to cleanse it and make sure that the quality of the data is good, which will then allow us to get a good understanding and provide visibility to the business of where, when, what, how, and when. So that we can drive the business forward and make decisions based on key information.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, I mean, I think there's going to be no surprise to everyone in the audience to know that data is not being used to its full potential, neither that the legal profession has a lot of data that it's probably not leveraging as well as it should. You're mentioning a couple of things that I think kind of relates to the need for how do you organize the data within the company in terms of the access and I guess the skill set. So maybe I'm going to look into those to come back to those. So let's start on the access in terms of sharing the data. Where do you collect the data? How do you collect it? who has access to it. It's very important. It can seem a bit boring and dull, but it's necessary if you want to get insight, and we move to the insight afterwards. So maybe Rebecca, maybe at EasyJet, what have you been doing in terms of making sure that you have the best access possible of that data?
So as I said, Dexter, we're quite at the beginning of our data journey, I think. But one thing that's really helpful is that as a group, EasyJet is really trying to be a data-driven company. So there's a lot of focus on that, and there has been a lot of investment already into business teams in terms of using data and analytics for business decision making. Now, as you might imagine, and this might resonate with other colleagues, when you're in a support function, your area is probably lower down the list in terms of investment into in terms of sort of getting the whizzy data scientists and sort of big data lakes being created for a legal function. But having said that, there are certain ways of going about getting access, and we've really managed to do a lot by leveraging our good relationships with our IT and data colleagues to try to help us, leveraging our relationships with the finance team, who obviously have access to a lot of finance data, and then doing some self-help measures ourselves in terms of doing some more rudimentary data analytics, trying to understand. We've got a claims handling team, so that's quite an interesting area, I think, where data can really make a huge difference in terms of understanding sort of resourcing models and ultimately outcomes and decision making. So we've made quite a start, again, sort of with the support of pulling in some of those other teams to create sort of data sets for ourselves and to do some analytics. But there's a long way for us to go on that.
Yes, that's interesting. I mean, again, very, very early in the journey in that kind of where to leverage data. John, can you maybe tell us a bit more in terms of what you've been doing with HSBC?
Yeah, thanks, Dexter. So look, I probably look at it in terms of what's the legal work that's been done by the in-house function. If we just categorize that broadly, this is imperfect, but if we say it's legal advice, it might be litigation investigations work, or it might be contract work. And if you had those three buckets, how's that work coming into the legal function? In terms of your colleagues, how are they making a request for legal services? I think then going back to the point I made, the first question is, how are you collecting that data? And that might be a request management system, it might be a workflow system. It doesn't really matter, but you need a better way of collecting that information so that you can then provide sort of insights into that work that's being managed by your kind of legal function. So initially, if the request is coming in on a platform, are you able to go back to your colleague to answer that? And then off the back of that data that you start to collect, you can see how long requests are taken, when are they closed, and they may even grow to be, say, a matter, a more complex kind of issue that runs for days or kind of weeks. Then I think you need to be able to sort of analyze that data, and that's where, candidly, you probably want to start to leverage your legal operations professionals who could take the data and start to provide insights or thematics back to the general counsel for that particular area. And that could be, what are the common requests that are coming through? How long is it taking to turn round sort of requests? How long are matters lasting for? So you can get a lot of information if you collect it through the right to request management or workflow tool. And to Rebecca's point, if that platform is enterprise-wide, then you can leverage the broader organization, because you may be a smaller function. You can leverage kind of improvements in the platform that, say, finance have done, or risk and compliance have done, or the business have done to sort of really get the most bang for your buck as a smaller sort of in-house legal function.
Yeah, I mean, I want to carry on with that in terms of the importance of the rest of the business. So obviously you've got your legal function doing certain things, but obviously you're part of a bigger business. So how important is it to get, I guess, one, that buy-in from the rest of the business, and two, that kind of relationship in terms of not only with the general counsel, but maybe with the CTO, CIO, CFO, even CEO. How important is that to get that right as well? John, maybe you want to start with that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really good point, because you probably need to make sure, if the requests are coming from the business or other colleagues in your kind of organization, you want them to buy into using say an application or a system to send that request to legal function, rather than just picking up the phone, which is very difficult to capture that kind of that data, or sending it via email, which is very difficult to then scrape off kind of Outlook to analyze it. What we've done in HSBC is really get kind of the business buy-in very, very early on. So, for example, if you're a coverage banker operating in sort of Middle England, can you operate in your platform? Let's say, for example, that's MS Dynamics. Send the request to the legal function. It arrives in your platform. You're able to respond to that query, and it goes straight back to the coverage banker in the platform that they're working in. That way, I think, Dexter, what you're doing, you're not asking your colleague to go to a different platform. You're saying, actually, you can use your platform with the use of APIs that can come directly into me. I can respond to that quickly and go back to you. I think you get support from the business and buy-in from them. I think also, if you're using enterprise technology, you're going to get support from the CIO, because it's a platform that they would support, that they would invest in, that they would sort of make sort of improvements. But again, we're similar to Rebecca. Early part of the journey, I'm super excited by it because I think it works and we can gain the insights from the data that you see as a legal function. But you do need the support of, various stakeholders around your organization.
Rebecca.
Yeah, just to say, in terms of sort of getting the support and the buy-in, it's absolutely critical. And as a general counsel in a company which is doing its best to provide low-cost flights to customers, we obviously need to keep our costs as low as possible. So for me, it's about demonstrating how we would use these tools to find efficiencies, to find time savings, to see where we can make gains and scale the work that we're able to handle in our function, but without constantly adding in additional costs in terms of headcount or external costs. So actually, it's been a sort of open door with our CFO recently to say, we've started to analyze this. I'm really getting good insights into where my spend is coming from, what's generating the spend, how that translates into our sort of outsource model, and how, of course, what's music to his ears. How can I use this data to save costs, or to work efficiently, or to make sure that the team in-house are working on, the right things and the most interesting things where they're going to add the most value, and we're using our external spend in the most sensible way. So that's a really good and kind of rich conversation to have with your finance function, I've found. And then, it definitely starts to unlock an investment case for your function in terms of getting access to the data and being able to use that, to achieve that end.
Jason, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think John hit the nail on the head, so to speak. You've got to meet the users where they work from the outset to get their buy-in, right? So typically they spend a lot of their time in Microsoft Word or in Microsoft Outlook. So you want to be able to meet them where they are. So if I look at an example of like a matter intake system where one of our clients actually was trying to track the matter intake on a manual basis, and by putting in some technology, they saw the matter intake number increase. It went more than double. So it allowed them to see all the things that were happening that they were unaware of that was going on in the business. So like John said, sending an email to somebody who may or may not be in or out of office. So it's collating that data in a way in which it becomes valuable. And then from there, you can say, right, how much of this actually needs to touch the legal department? How much of it can be automated? How much of it can then be run through some template or AI, since AI is a very topical point right now? How much of it can run through AI to give me a first draft? So I think that by having that buy-in from the business, meeting them where they work and making it easy for them to access helps contribute to what we're trying to achieve here from a legal transformation journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important point, meeting the user where they are, because most users won't be that technically savvy. So they need to be able to use those tools as easily as possible so that the business can leverage the data as well as possible. And it kind of leads me to maybe my next point, and I'll start again with you, maybe there, Jason, in terms of at the beginning, Rebecca mentioned, we had the access and sharing the data, but there's also the need for the skills of the legal professionals to know how to use those tools. So obviously from on a Thomson Reuters perspective, what do you see and what do you think should be done for kind of the legal profession to be able to use those tools as effectively as possible going forward?
Well, I think, it's a mindset, and it's educating the users of the benefits that the tools provide. The tools are there not to be an extra challenge or to be a blocker for them in their day jobs. They're there to make their lives easier. So when you think about that, it's bringing them on board with the right mindset and with the buy-in from the top of the organization. It's always best if it comes top down, so that it can be effective and then spread right across the group. So I think that would be the best place to start.
And maybe if I move to you, Rebecca, and John, obviously, is there anything you feel you've done internally to improve that skill set in terms of your team and your legal professional? Is there any kind of training or anything you're looking into? Maybe start with you, Rebecca.
Yeah, Dexter, I think that we haven't got to the point of formal training, although it's definitely something that we've spoken about. And actually, we're fortunate within my function that we also have cybersecurity sitting inside our function alongside our lawyers who are very technical and very savvy and really good with tools. So we started to say, how can we use that skill set across our team in a more cross-functional way? But actually what I've really been focusing on, particularly with my leadership team, is the skill of curiosity, which is something that we talk about really generally as lawyers. And so trying to encourage them to want the data, to be curious about what's happening in their team, how they can work more efficiently or better, or provide development opportunities for their team, and to be genuinely curious about what the data will show and where it will lead them, and also to use it very positively to make a case to demonstrate the value that we're adding as a team and a function. And that's been quite a motivating, I think, for people to get behind, again, surfacing data which demonstrates where we've supported successful positions for the company, where we've saved money or where we've contributed towards revenue, and to use and celebrate that. So I've sort of tried to win over hearts and minds, as well as looking at the kind of practical skills of how do you use and analyze data.
What about you, John? Is it more formal or still fairly informal, shall we say?
Look, I think when you start to introduce different tools to collect data, you're first of all you're looking at a change program, and that can make people in your organization quite anxious, just around kind of what are you doing, why are you changing my role, what is there an ulterior motive? So I think you've got to explain the reason for kind of collecting the data. And I think Rebecca talked about that. It's a very, very powerful tool to then sit down and talk to CIOs and CFOs about here's the value that the legal function brings, not just the cost, not just the number of internal and external spend, but here's the number of requests that matters, here's the value add that you provide. But then going back to the point about the skills, I think you need to be really partnering our lawyers with our legal operation professionals. And I think there are many people that can help in this space. We do have business managers that are data analysts partnering with general counsels around the globe, supporting them in managing their particular area of the business. And then sort of, we've run sessions where we've said, look, here's the insights that we've gained from the tools that we've put in place. And let's just kind of share a few thematics and just talk through, what we've gathered. I think Rebecca touched on a wonderful point as well. I think lawyers are naturally curious anyway. If you promote that, I think when you start to present things around the data, they're curious to know more. And even if they don't raise it in the room, they'll probably come back to you afterwards and say, oh, by the way, John, could I just go through and look at that data? Could you do the same for my area? And slowly, you start to kind of like build out that sort of interest in data because of the insights that you gain. One thing that I would say, one story that I'll pinch from my chief legal officer, I'm sure he won't mind, is if you don't collect the data, then what you have, imagine this. Imagine you've got a bird's eye view of your kind of office of EasyJet. You've got your kind of 15, 20 lawyers coming in the morning. You can see them walking in. Once they're in the building, you don't know what they're doing. You can see them walking out at the end of the day. By gathering that data, you'll get powerful insights into what your legal ops staff are doing day in, day out. And I think that's the critical thing for me.
I think we can all agree with that. And also it's quite interesting when you mentioned in terms of bringing the lawyer, the human into place, because we'll talk about the technology as the technology is that thing replacing us potentially, but it's far more about augmentation in my view. And I think that's also the case there. Let's maybe move on a bit from, I guess, the data and the collection, the accessing, the sharing in terms of the actual decision making potentially in terms of what we've been doing. So Jason, I kind of want to start with you because I think you'll have an overall picture in terms of when you're selling the solution as Thomson Reuters, when you're having those legal solution, what are the key use cases you're seeing, legal professional using technology for in kind of data analytics? Is there anything that kind of springs to mind to you?
Yeah, look, I mean, the technology's very broad when you think about it from a legal perspective. There's spend management, there's matter management, there's drafting, there's a variety of different aspects and use cases that you can bring technology into the legal department. But I think the overarching thing that is really important is that where the data is coming from, where the tech is being used, needs to be trusted and it needs to be verified. And I think that is really, really important for the success of the use of any kind of technology, whether it be AI technology or existing technology. So I think that, from a use case perspective, there's a couple of main ones. Spend management, reducing costs, that's always a big use case. The other use case is, drafting is a fundamental one. And using technology like Practical Law, like Co-Counsel, where we can actually bring the drafting tools to the users and not just provide them with the technology, but also provide them with first drafts and the ability to do redlining. So I think that that's really important from that aspect.
And John and Rebecca, can I ask you to give us maybe some example in terms of what you've been doing? Early example. Is it the same thing that Jason has mentioned in terms of cost management, in terms of drafting? Was there anything else? Maybe starting with you, John.
Yeah, I think Jason's touched on a few sort of tools there that we've started to use or have been using for a while. Whether that is kind of like spend management, whether that's kind of tendering tools, request management and workflow, just to improve, how we manage our business. But what I would like to do is just step back one, because I think you shouldn't start with the technology. I think you need to really sort of start with, what am I trying to solve? Because sometimes it can be simply a case of, is the process as efficient as it used to be? Have you got the right people looking at the work? So I think there's some analysis to do before you jump into a sort of technology solution. And we've spent a lot of time doing that. Otherwise, my fear is that in-house functions can go off trying to sort of justify business cases and commission kind of change programs and then not really get the benefit because they've not been clear on the outcomes from the get-go. So I would caution, make sure you understand what you're trying to solve for, what the outcome is. Really validate that it might be a process improvement first off before you go down the technology route. But if it becomes a technology solution, there are some great tools out there. I think for HSBC, we very much look at enterprise solutions, as I mentioned from the outset, because they're really scalable, and then as a smaller function, you benefit from incremental advances in that platform.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with John there in terms of making sure that we're actually worked out what strategically are we trying to achieve as a function? Where are we trying to get to? And we've sort of rooted it in our 5-year planning process that we do enterprise level to say, okay, how are we going to get from here to here in line with the company's ambitions, and what do we as a function therefore need to change and be able to do and to deliver in order to get there? And that unlocks some really, really good conversations, because there are many brilliant tools out there, and we could absolutely, if we were to ever be allowed to have the budget, go on a wonderful spending spree. But actually, we need to be really, really focused. Where we, I think, have adopted technology and been using it probably most effectively at the moment in a practical sense, to as you asked for an example, is in terms of outside counsel management. So actually, we have got really good visibility now of our spend around our panel firm, which areas of the business are generating that spend, how we're allocating between our panel, how we're accessing, therefore, and unlocking the sort of value adds and the rates that we've negotiated, and giving really good visibility across the whole function of who's using who for what, and how that's all going. So actually, that's an area that has been really exciting in it, and it's working really, really well. And so we can sort of use our learnings from that to, resource management is the big unlock, I think. But back absolutely to John's point, we're also really working through all of our processes at the moment, particularly in the contracting side. And I think there's a lot that we want to get right first and understand first before we jump to to a technical solution.
Yes, it's all about, I think John is right, it's not about the technology per se, it's about the use case and the need, I think, of the business, and then you can see whether the technology can help or not, and understanding your processes and understanding what can be done. Sometimes the technology is not always a solution, I guess, in terms of what you're doing. Jason, you wanted to intervene?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that in any way. You've got to know what you're solving for. You've got to know what the pain points are and what success looks like before you embark in any journey. And as John was saying, it could be process related. It could be that technology can help the process. It could be a array of different things. So, absolutely agree with everything that was said between Rebecca and John here.
Good. We're in agreement. That's good. Maybe I kind of want to discuss again, I think, Jason, you mentioned it earlier in terms of some of the challenges you might be facing in terms of using technology, whether that's security, whether that's reliability, whether that's trust, all of those kind of things that kind of picking up in the news. Does that make it more difficult for all of you as kind of legal professional to know to use this tool or to decide to use this tool? Because I know in my conversation with legal professional at previous event, this is something that kind of always comes up. Like, we're not quite sure in terms of some of these things. So are we still in a situation where it's an issue and it's something to think about, and it's kind of almost a barrier or an hindrance to greater adoption? Anybody want to go first? Maybe Jason?
Yes, I don't think it's necessarily a barrier. I think it's definitely something that people are aware of and that they are cautious of, because at the end of the day, it's their reputation that's at risk. So if they're using any kind of technology, they need to know that the source that it's coming from has been, as I said a little bit earlier on, has been verified and trusted, so that when you put your name against something, you know that it's come from an area that's validated, right? So I think that's the important thing. So when it comes to utilizing technology, a lot of people in the beginning started to use just free, open, available AI tools. And it can be very convincing, and the responses can be fantastic, and they can also be totally made up and a hallucination because you don't know where it's coming from. So I think that tread with caution and make sure that the technology or the solutions that you're using have a reference that you can benefit from.
John and Rebecca. Yeah, Rebecca?
Yeah, I'm build off that point. I think the last point about taking a cautious approach to things like AI. It's been really interesting seeing the sort of journey of adoption of AI, both in EasyJet and more widely over the last 12 months. And as a legal function, we've been hugely involved in partnering with our IT colleagues and our business colleagues in terms of the use cases that the business is generating and thinking about all of those sort of governance, ethics, reliability questions. And I think we have got ourselves comfortable with a sort of cautious approach to using it for ourselves, having, as I say, been the business partner that's been working with other parts of the business on it. And we've got some really good ideas actually as to what the world of opportunity for AI in our function is. So we're up for it, but with the right testing, the right governance framework, the right considerations always about, the reliability and the ethics of certain, use cases. So yeah, a sort of cautious but up for it approach, if that's not a dichotomy.
No, I don't think it is. John?
Yeah, I would say, just going back to sort of Jason's point, that your legal department is not going to make a decision on the platform that it will buy. You're going to be working with CIOs, you're going to be working with procurement, cyber experts that will make sure that third-party supplier is the right supplier to work with your organization. That's the first thing I'd say. And then when it comes to AI and innovation, I think HSBC's kind of point would be, look, we stay close to kind of AI and innovative technology as it relates to improving the service that we provide to our customers, and as it makes kind of HSBC able to operate more effectively and efficiently. I think that would be the view I would take.
Yes, I mean, again, we're still early in the journey, and I think we're going to be learning. I think quite recently OpenAI said that the latest model was still hallucinating 37% of the time, so maybe we need to be cautious, as Rebecca mentioned, to make sure that we don't get to the wrong decision. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using these tools and understanding what these tools are doing, because they're going to get better and they're going to become much more useful going forward as well. Let me carry on a bit in terms of looking maybe at something that Rebecca mentioned in terms of benchmarking, in terms of optimizing outside counsel in terms of spending. That's something that's been discussed quite a lot in terms of getting more data and making sure that you know what your different businesses, your different business models are using. So maybe if I start with you, Jason, in terms of where do you think having kind of a data-driven strategy helps in terms of that benchmarking for benchmarking purposes?
Yeah, so I mean, from a data-driven strategy works because it gives you insight to where your spend is. So, for example, Rebecca spoke about spend management and being able to manage their vendors better. The data is providing you with that information and seeing where you're spending, which outside counsel you're using or you're utilizing. Is there a particular type of work that you're constantly putting through a one vendor over another? It gives you the ability to negotiate because you have the power in your hands, right, from a data perspective.
Yeah. John, do you have any kind of insight in terms of are you using kind of the data in terms of outside counsel?
No, look, I think Rebecca summarised that quite nicely. I think when you start to look at external legal spend and you start to competitively tender work, you immediately get insights into that in terms of how your kind of panel firms will work with you. And if you're capturing that data, you can then sort of start to analyse it in a more sort of thorough way. I think as it relates to benchmarking more kind of broadly, I think there's a lot in that. There's a lot of kind of things that you can start to compare against across the industry. That might be your internal, external kind of spend mix. It might be your technology solutions that you have in place. It might be your knowledge management platforms. There's a lot of benchmarking out there that in-house counsels and firms can make use of.
Yeah, but I guess kind of putting on and maybe kind of going back to, I guess, the decision making in terms of, or you make those decisions or you can make those comparisons in terms of internal versus external, and how you kind of report to your board or to your board of directors into the rest of the business. What important has it been, and what have you been doing in terms of kind of using the data more specifically? I'm guessing I'm looking, because we've talked a lot about, I know it's very early, it's early days, you've done a few things, but is there anything kind of more specific you can probably share in terms of specific examples? So for instance, we've got a question from the audience, which I wanted to wait until the end, but I think it's an interesting one, which is, it was to Rebecca, but I think it's probably to all of you, which is, what's been your biggest aha moment with your CEO or CFO based on data or metrics, which means, has there been kind of a case when you've been discussing with your peers or with the people on the C-level where you've kind of used data to make a decision or to try to drive a decision? Is there anything that you feel that you've done, or are we still so early in the journey that it hasn't really happened, or at least hasn't happened to that extent? Who wants to go first, or are you scared by my long-winded question? Rebecca, maybe I'll start with you.
I'll try and give it a go. I'd love to have an aha moment to point to, but I think it's been more of the journey, and I suppose particularly in the area of claims handling. So as a customer-facing business, we are on the receiving end of some volume passenger claims, and we've looked at different models for how to handle that, in-source, outsource, hybrid, use of different types of skill sets and various, and actually, the journey of that started with an aha quite a long time ago, actually, in terms of sort of flipping on its head the more traditional assumption that outsourcing would be the way forward. And actually we were able to show, sort of using spend data and other metrics, that we could, that we might go with a different model, which was much more focused on in-house with sort of some external spend that flexes. And we've continued to iterate that model hand in hand, absolutely, with the input volume data, the claims trends, the claims outcome data, and the external spend by market data, because we're pan-European. So it absolutely varies across the jurisdictions, and there's all sorts of inputs, which has been brilliant. It's been brilliant to be able to work, with data that we've got organizationally in terms of our passengers and sorts of volumes that are coming through at the very front end of the process, without getting into a lot of detail, and to use that then then that was when I mentioned earlier partnering with our finance function and our finance business partner, who has been incredibly helpful in this journey in terms of helping us to use the data to be able to make really well-informed decisions about, should we add heads into the team to cover a certain jurisdiction, or should we outsource, or should we use a flexible model, and various other things, and to support the business case. So that was a bit long-winded probably, but that's one of my kind of really good tangible ways that I've seen us use data, even very, and that in quite a rudimentary way, and now in a much more sophisticated way over the last few years.
John.
Look, I think to your point, Dexter, first of all, you always want to be demonstrating kind of efficiency of legal spend to the board, right? And that's every month, every quarter, and during your planning cycle over the summer. So I think that is a given, that we'll all be doing that, and always looking for efficiency in terms of how you're using the organization's money. What we've done is we've discovered lots of things along that journey, and it could be things like, by collecting data, we could see that branch queries that came regularly to lawyers could be automated and put on a sort of a frequently asked questions tool, so that it never even touches the lawyers. And that's not me as a COO looking to just cut costs. It's me as freeing up time of lawyers to do other work that's, really interesting, that they're kind of, well skilled to be able to do that. And we've also been able to compare work done by external counsel versus the costs of doing it internally. And that could be internally in a high cost location versus a nearshore location versus an offshore location, or even partnering with an alternative legal service provider to have a model by which you're working across kind of three different suppliers, law firm, alternative legal service provider, an in-house firm. And we wouldn't have got that had we not been capturing the data, analyzing the data, and just going back to Rebecca's point, being curious and asking ourselves, could we do that in a more effective and more efficient way possible? The thing that I'd caution people against is don't just pursue it from I want to save cost. You want to be more efficient, and you might not need to hand that cost back to your CFO. You might be able to redeploy that into something else that you can use intra-year, and that's really powerful. And then celebrate the people that come up with those ideas, recognize them, call them out for the idea that they came to your chief legal officer and said, wouldn't it be better if we did it this way? Those are really powerful things that I've seen over the last few years.
And Jason, what have you seen in terms of use cases?
Yeah, no, look, I agree with everything that Rebecca and John have said there, and I love the approach that John just mentioned there about bringing it back and celebrating it with your colleagues, because that just drives more curiosity, and people want to find solutions and do more. So absolutely 100%. But as far as like an aha moment is concerned, by having that data, it allowed, an example, allowed one of our international customers to see how they could put up a center outside of a location, let's say the UK or the US, so something in Mexico or something in Kuala Lumpur, where they're able to benefit from the high volume at certain times of the year. So that was the aha moment, is that by having everything centralized, by having all the data in one place, that you're able to then analyze and see peaks and troughs and workflows. You're able to adjust the business resources and benefit the business by the data.
Rebecca, yes.
Yeah, just John's great points and Jason's great points as well have just made me think about something sort of building off the point I made earlier about trying to engage people and win over hearts and minds. And I think having some symbolic gestures that you celebrate and that you absolutely share back to the function. And one thing that we've done this year to try to, again, to sort of spark a bit of competition, to spark people thinking innovatively, and to, and data underpins this, is we set the function a challenge of demonstrating that they'd access time savings of a certain number of hours, quite an ambitious target for the function, and we're tracking that. And the time saving should be through efficiency. So back to John's point, absolutely not, my CFO won't like this, but I'm absolutely not planning to hand back the budget back to the centre. I absolutely want to use our time and resources to be able to do more, and to do more exciting things and more things that are adding the most value to the company. So I just wanted to share that, because it was a sort of symbolic thing that we did, but people are really getting behind it and trying to think, how can I contribute and how can I use, and then they have to have the data to prove that they actually really did have that time saving, and that this was the process that they trimmed down, or this was the efficiency that they found.
That's really interesting, because it can come from a very small example, in terms of a lawyer spending maybe 2 hours doing something and realizing that, as John mentioned, you do an FAQ and he doesn't have to spend those 2 hours a day or 2 hours a week. And that seems fairly simple, but that's kind of very important. If you multiply it by a number of legal professional across a number of days or a number of weeks, to kind of much broader theme. And I kind of want to pick up, I think we're kind of going back to the importance of the data. And I want to pick up on the point that Jason mentioned in terms of the importance of centralization, because we had a question, and I'm going to send it to you. I'm going to say it actually, which is how much you rely on your own data compared to data from external providers. And we also had another one looking at what kind of data source was the most surprisingly valuable. So obviously the data is coming from all different sources, and the key is in the centralization. So do you think that do you all agree that the key is in the centralization of the different data? And do you see a difference between internal, external, publicly available, or is it still the same level and you kind of need to take it with a pinch of salt and think about it and see where that data is coming from in order to get the better insight? Jason, because you mentioned centralization, do you have anything you want to kind of add on that?
Yeah, so obviously I think centralization is fundamental, but I also think that it's important to understand your data. So internal data you trust because it's coming from people within you. It's your organization. I think with external data, you need to be, I'll use that word again, cautious, because people are not going to be presenting 100% of the truth from an external perspective. So it depends on how it's been gathered and where it's been gathered from, if you're going to compare it against your internal situation.
And John, Rebecca, in the internal versus external debate and the kind of the need for centralization, where do you stand? John, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, look, I think the important thing internally, as Jason said, you'll trust your own data because you know where it's coming from. What you need to guard against is kind of having colleagues then will start to build their own kind of like spreadsheet where they're using data that's not coming from a system. So I guard against that kind of work and just make sure you're all looking at the same golden source of data internally, and you should be able to do that. We do get from our law firms and also our alternative legal service providers some excellent data insights. And law firms will provide, really a clear view of their kind of external spend, what matters they're working on, the cost of those. And we use those to compare against our budget and forecasting to make sure that they're sort of trued up, and where there are discrepancies, then we'll sort those out through, normal sort of course of business or relationship meetings. But your providers will provide some excellent insight into the external spend, but you should be able to cross-check that against what you expect to have budgeted and spend.
Rebecca, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I don't have a great deal to add on that. I think the outside spend management, as I said, we've developed or we have access to a tool which has been really, really helpful for verifying the spend that we're receiving from the outside counsel and for analysing that. And in terms of our own sort of internal data, I think it's more about the different internal data sources and trying to get to one source of the truth. And John's absolutely right. There's a real, there's absolutely the risk or the challenge of people kind of getting their own spreadsheet and having their own version of the truth, and another colleague having a different one, and then you just get into the battle of the data rather than a really good conversation. So I think what I've been really focused on is as we've touched on earlier, trying to tap into sort of enterprise-wide data and to use tools that we're using as a company so that we're all looking at the same thing and that our finance colleagues are seeing the same thing as we might be seeing, and our operations colleagues and others. So for me, it's about the sort of internal versus the different internal and getting it right.
Yes, I mean, that's interesting as well. It's not just internal as a kind of a monolith in terms of one source of data, but there's different sources of data internally, externally, and how you kind of figure that out is very important. Because we've got a few minutes to go, maybe we've talked a lot, it's early in the journey, so maybe we'll look a bit in terms of the future, the future, not the future in 20 years' time, but maybe in the next 2 to 5 years, where we're seeing all of this developing and kind of what kind of new insight we're seeing, and kind of what new technology and what new use cases you're seeing. So maybe I'll start with you, Jason. If you want to look at maybe the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what are you seeing in terms of what can't be done right now that are going to become in the realm of the possible in the next few years?
Yeah, what's coming, the future, I think it's an interesting one, right? Because I think what's going to happen in the next 2 to 5 years is that lawyers are actually going to be lawyering a lot more than they're doing right now, because technology is going to be taking care of the mundane tasks, the day-to-day tasks that they're doing, that's taking up hours of their time, that's stopping them from progressing their careers, from being, really good lawyers in a specific area or a specific niche, and allowing them to progress their careers. Because there's been so much of the admin side of things brought into the lawyer's role right now. I think technology will help substantially to progress that out of their jobs and allow them to do more lawyering.
Rebecca, do you agree? Are you going to become even more of a lawyer going forward?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way of putting it. And, to an earlier point, there's always a risk that people feel nervous about the adoption of technology and it taking away from some of their, being a lawyer. But I think that lawyers are going to have to be technically savvy and tech enabled, and the human driving the technology and understanding it. I think it's a great opportunity, and it will free up the time and the headspace for lawyers to do more lawyering. So I think that's a good way of putting it. I think that it will be really interesting for us. We haven't adopted workflow tools yet, but I think that that's something that will be game changing at the point at which we manage to really land that, and I would expect to see more of that going forward. And then automation of the mundane tasks, the repetitive tasks, the sort of things that can be self-served, much more self-served. And then I think what will be really interesting, and we haven't really got into it, and I thought we might do, would be the use of analytics and AI for decision making of legal decisions. And at what point do you hand off, or where does the lawyer come in versus where does the data take you to a decision point and an outcome and an advisory point? And I think I don't even know where that will all go yet. But again, if I sort of think in our volume litigation business, why would it would be amazing to have a tool that would start to really give you the deep insights to say, these are this is the case that you win, this is the one that you won't win, this is the one that you should settle. And I can't see why there wouldn't be a world where those sorts of tools would be available. They might be available now.
Where do you think it will go? Because you say you don't know, but do you have kind of an opinion in terms of where you think it might go?
I think that, I think traditionally the legal profession's been a bit slower and more cautious on these things. So I think we'll still sort of lag behind maybe some other professions in terms of really using data to transform and tools and automation to transform jobs. But I think that we will. And I think that as a client, I'll be looking to my panel of law firms to also demonstrate to me how they're using it to be more efficient, to take unnecessary, I suppose, cost out of the process, and to inform, really good advice and really good decision making. So, I think it will continue to develop and maybe at a reasonable pace now.
And John, what about you? Where do you see, the profession in a few years?
Look, as it relates to kind of, data, go back to sort of Jason's point, I think we're going to see, in-house functions, but law firms, collecting and using data in terms of how they deliver legal services. And that might be, as we said, it might be automation. It might be where you deliver that service. I just think it's going to provide you really good insights. The thing I would say is that you've got to make sure that your data is tagged, is clean, can be used effectively. And if it's structured that way, my hope is that then is that in the future that AI tools can come across and start to use that data, or provide different insights into that data, going forward. So I'm super excited by the use of data, process improvements, and technology as we we advance the sort of the legal profession.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, that's definitely going to be the case. And maybe kind of a final question, which is also coming from our audience, and I like to thank our audience for sending those questions, which is, we haven't touched too much on AI, and that was kind of on purpose in a sense. We didn't want to make it too much about AI. But there's a question in terms of, how can you update yourself, I guess, as a legal professional with AI to leverage a future legal career? So would you have maybe one piece of advice each in terms of understanding AI? I think we mentioned in terms of lawyers becoming more tech-enabled going forward. Is there anything specific to with AI, or is it going to be part of an overall kind of tech stack, do you think? Jason, if I want to start with you.
Yeah, look, I think AI is here to stay, right? And you'd be a fool to think that it was going away. So it's definitely a matter of embrace AI, but AI is not going to replace us as people. At the end of the day, we're the ones that created the AI, and we're the ones that are in control of it. So don't be scared of it. Use it to your advantage.
Rebecca.
Yeah, good advice from Jason. I think try it, and there's obviously publicly available tools to use to get familiar with. Maybe in your organizations there are some tools that people have started to use, and I think that's by far and away the best way. Find a safe and area in which you can use it and just see and learn, and just become a bit familiar with it. I think absolutely it will not replace the role of the human, and we shouldn't be worried about that at all. But I think it could be a really good assistant sitting next to you to help you to work more efficiently, more effectively, to just give you the ability to do your job even better. So I would try and sort of see the use case like that, and look at some of those sort of assistant type tools that, just start off there.
And John.
I think personally and professionally, it's a really interesting space. What I'd encourage people to do is, go out and find more about it. Go to a conference, take some online training, be curious, because there's some really interesting things out there. The bit I go back to saying is that, for us as a bank, if AI and innovative technology, we look at it from a perspective, is it improving the service that we deliver to our clients and colleagues? Is it making us as an organization more effective and more efficient? But be curious and go and find it out yourself. Be a reflective practitioner. Think about how you can improve your own knowledge about these evolving technologies.
Thank you. And, I think this is a very good conclusion to the discussion, and because I'm afraid this is all we have time for. So maybe a few key takeaways from me. We're still very, very early in the journey. There's still a lot to be done, but in a sense, I think the word we've used the most is probably the word curious and curiosity, and even John used it in his last reply. Be curious about the technology. Don't be afraid of it, because as Jason mentioned, with technology, a lawyer will be even more of a lawyer as long as he's become a tech-enabled lawyer. And I think that's very interesting things. And obviously leverage the technology in order to kind of solve a real business use case, as opposed to kind of using technology for its sake. But this is an exciting time. A lot will happen. If we were to do that same webinar a year ago, I think there would be an awful lot of different things that would have happened. As I always mention too, when I do events and presentation, ChatGPT was launched in November 2022, which is not that long ago. So a lot of things can happen. So I would like to thank everyone. So obviously, thank you all my fellow speakers and panelists for the session. I would like to thank the audience for joining us. And I would like to thank also our sponsors, Thomson Reuters, for this event. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is part of a three webinar series. And the next will be on June the 18th on the topic, is there a business case for legal technology? Practical takeaways, pitfalls, and best practices. I hope to see you all then. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.